We'll get started in just a minute. We're just waiting on a few more people to join us. Our doorbell keeps ringing with people from the waiting room. All right, I think we will go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. Before I jump in, I just want to give a couple Zoom etiquette reminders. Because we're doing a screen share and you're looking at slides, probably the best way to view things is gallery view. And I have myself and our artists pinned to the top. So you should see Renee, Sue, or Suzanne, and Adrian all right at the top if you're using gallery view. Also, you're welcome to share your video feed. We love seeing faces, especially in the question and answer portion when I turn off the screen share, but please keep your microphones muted until we get to that question and answer portion. You're welcome to use the chat. I've got a lovely assistant, Katie Pershawn from the Art Gallery helping. She'll read off questions from the chat when we get to the end, or you can use the raise hand button if you'd prefer to share your question over your microphone. All right. So thank you for being here and welcome to this Unpacking the Exhibition event in support of our winter exhibition titled Sorrowfulness, a Reflection on Mourning, that is now on view at the GVSU Art Gallery in the Haas Center for Performing Arts on our Allendale campus. We are so thrilled to have all three artists with us to talk about their work today, and I'll introduce them in a moment. I'm going to play for you a little video that takes you through our webpage. If you haven't seen the show yet, or you're unable to come to campus, we've got a ton of great information available here on this webpage, including a virtual interactive 3D tour, which you'll get a little preview of right here. And if you are able to visit campus, you're welcome to see the exhibition in person during our regular gallery hours through Friday, April 1st. So you have a couple months to still see the exhibition. And you can find those regular hours as well as visitor information, like where to park, on our website, along with some learning resources and a really wonderful reading list that we developed in collaboration with university libraries. So I always like to take a moment to share just a few bits of information about the art gallery in general, because we do so much here on campus. And I know that a few of our guests joining us may have never been to the gallery or participated in an event like this. So the GVSU Art Gallery actually serves the entire campus community across all campuses. We hold the second largest art collection in the state of Michigan. Artwork is thoughtfully curated into every university building. If you're a GVSU student, you've probably noticed this. And we believe that visual art viewing experiences have the power to spark conversations, action, and reflection on core themes of social justice, human rights, and empathy that align with the university's philosophy of liberal education. So with that, I'm going to introduce our three artists, and then we'll get started with Sue, who I'll introduce first. Sue Amendolara. Hopefully I'm saying your name right. I've actually never asked. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it's fine.
Sue was born in Youngstown, Ohio. She received a Master's of Fine Arts degree in jewelry design and metalsmithing from Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, and a Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. She currently teaches jewelry design, metalsmithing at Edinburgh University in Pennsylvania. She served as president of the Society of North American Goldsmiths from 2011 to 2014, and is currently a member of the Board of Governors at Aeromont School of Arts and Crafts in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Her metalwork has been exhibited regionally, nationally, and internationally in galleries and museums, and is part of the permanent collections of the Renwick Gallery, of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the White House Collection of American Crafts, both in Washington, D.C. Next, I'll introduce Adrian Grafton, who's a studio artist currently living and working in the Virgin Islands. We're all thoroughly jealous of you right now. She earned her MFA in metal design from East Carolina University in 2005. She's shown her work and taught workshops throughout the United States. Her work has been published in a variety of books, including The Art of Enameling and Art Jewelry Today, 3, She worked as the metal studio coordinator at Penland School of Crafts in North Carolina from 2005 to 2007 and taught metals and foundations at Edinburgh University from 2008 through 2016. She was also a resident artist at Salem Artworks in 2014 in Salem, New York. Her 2018 solo show titled Departed traveled from Hope Center for Arts and Technology in Sharon, Pennsylvania to Greenboro College in Greenboro, North Carolina. And her most recent solo show, Transplant, was on view at Pittsburgh Center for the Arts and Media from July to August 2019, which feels so long ago. I'll just play this again. I just have Renee's bio to read and then we'll pass it off to Sue. So Renee Zettle-Sterling, our very own GVSU professor, received her MFA in sculpture and her MA in metalsmithing from Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania. Renee is a professor of art here at Grand Valley in metalsmith and jewelry design. She's exhibited and lectured on her work nationally and internationally and is featured in many publications. Renee's also served as the president of the Society of North American Goldsmiths from 2012 to 2016, and she recently co-authored with Jen Townsend an award-winning book titled Cast: Art and Objects Made Using Humanity's Most Transformational Process. I've seen pictures, it looks like a really beautiful book. So with that, I would like to welcome Sue, Adrian, and Renee, and I'll pass it over to Sue.
Hey. Well, thank you. Thank you everybody for being here, and a special thank you to everybody at Grand Valley who worked so hard to bring this show to the gallery there. I see images online. The show looks beautiful. I wish I could be there in person to see it. I'm proud to share this space with Adrian and Renee, who have both been longtime friends and colleagues, and I admire and learn from both of them. Today, I'm going to talk about some pieces that are in the show, and I want to start with this piece because it's been pivotal in the body of work that's in this show. A few years ago, my colleague, Cappy Cunard, invited me to make a piece based on a tool or a group of tools in the Henry Mercer Tool Museum in Doylestown, PA. Next image, please. So I chose a pair of upholstery scissors because they reminded me of my childhood. They were in a case with tools to make wallpaper, and it brought me back to being in my parents' interior design studio. I spent a lot of time there as a kid, and I looked through wallpaper books and fabric books and antiques, and really enjoyed talking to my father about projects that he was working on. And I have no doubt that it was these experiences that led me to become a maker. I like the reference of my past with the form of the scissors, but they also suggest the idea of cutting through grief or pain. The form was developed by carving wax and incorporating dried flowers from my mother's funeral bouquet and cast in sterling silver. So you can see that on the image on the left here. The blades are fabricated in sterling silver. Next image, please. Presenting them in a deconstructed manner renders them ineffective, suggesting lingering grief or the inability to heal. Each separate piece of sterling rests in a carved wooden base. Originally, this was going to be the final piece, but it felt a little bit incomplete to me, so I added the fabric. Next piece, please, or image, please. The scissors rest on a small quilt or pillow form. I had some old silk left over from my wedding dress, and I transferred an image of dried flowers onto this silk. A wedding dress references family to me, and so using this fabric represented my own family. I've always used a variety of materials in my work, but I've never been able to figure out how to use fabric, even though I've tried for a long time to do so. This was the first time that I felt like it's worked. It feels like a funerary bed for these scissors. It's not necessarily what I set out to do, but I like the result. Next image, please. When I was in high school, I often played a game of spoons with my sister and my cousin and 3 other friends one of whom became my brother-in-law a few years later. One day, my sister called to tell me that the third man in the group had died. So half of us were gone, and all of the men in the group were gone. Losing people in my own generation feels different than losing people from an older generation. It's caused me to reflect on my past and my past relationships. This piece pays homage to those old times and indicates the absence of my friends and family through the carved empty spaces in the shadows where their spoons once rested. Next image. These are process shots of the eggshell mosaic on the base of the piece. I love the surface. I think it's beautiful, although it's very time consuming and labor intensive. So first, to do this process, you have to crack a lot of eggs, eat a lot of omelets, and clean out the shells carefully. This process can be done on wood or metal or clay, basically anything that has a firm structure underneath. It started by taking a large piece of the shell and crushing it onto a glued surface, in this case of the wood, and that creates the cracks. Then after the entire surface is covered with the eggshell, epoxy resin is poured over top of that. And in this case, I colored it with black pigment. And you can see here, it looks awful for a really long time. And at this point, then you just start sanding and sanding and sanding. Next image, please. And then eventually the surface of the eggshell is revealed. The three spoons that I've used are antique spoons that my mother gave me. And the shadows of the spoons are laser cut silk that have been glued down to the surface of the mosaic. Next image. I really enjoyed making the first pair of scissors, and I wanted to do it again, but on a smaller scale. So I decided on embroidery scissors. I've had this little piece of a pillowcase that my mother embroidered, and I carried it around with me everywhere I moved. It was probably 70 years old by the time I ended up using it. And I would go to throw it away, and then I'd pull it back out of the garbage. And eventually it found its way into this piece because I think it's so beautiful. Next image. I wanted to cast as much as the form as possible in hopes that it would create a more gestural form than the first pair. These are also non-functional for the same reason, to suggest an inability to function beyond grief. They open, there's a hinge in them, but you can't hold them in the way that you would normally hold a pair of scissors. I always take process shots with my phone. It helps me to look at a piece objectively and to make design decisions that way. Next image. So this is a detail of the piece, and it shows my sloppy attempt to mend the tears in this fabric with the pink embroidery next to my mother's beautiful blue embroidery. I really like the contrast between the crustiness of those cast pieces against the more refined materials used along with it. Next image, please. These two brooches are also about my mom. I created them from flowers from her funeral bouquets. And sometimes I'll alter the sticks and flowers just by soaking them in water, and that makes them pliable. And then I can create my own form that way, as I've done with this piece on the left here. Sometimes these castings are fragile, and so I support them by soldering a forged piece behind them. I like the look of it both visually and conceptually. Visually, again, I like the texture change between the cast object and the more refined metal, but conceptually, I want to use the idea of a fragile object being supported or propped up when it's too weak to hold up to itself by itself. I often feel my mother's presence in my daily life, and that's what these pieces symbolize. Next image, please. I began this piece as a brooch. I didn't have a super clear idea of what I wanted it to be. I just knew that I wanted that little bud, the flower bud, to be in the center and read as a portrait. I was really struggling trying to figure out how to finish it in terms of the materials, and also how to make it work as a brooch. Next image. Then one day I was walking through my studio and I paid special attention to these two little portraits that are hanging on my wall. These were in my bedroom when I was a little girl, and I shared that bedroom with my sister. And I realized that this is the character that I wanted this piece to have. Next image, please. The piece wasn't meant to be a brooch, and it was meant to have a companion piece. Next image. So this is the resulting piece, and it's about the close relationship I have and I've always had with my sister. Next image. So this is the last piece I'm going to talk about. Again, it started without a super clear idea of what I wanted it to be completed. I don't think this is necessarily the best way to work, but it's what tends to happen sometimes. Each of my pieces goes through a lot of iterations, and I try to work from my gut and do what feels right for each piece. So I was interested in making books and creating a story that was told on one page. Leading up to making this piece, I was forging fine silver. Those of you who work with silver know that fine silver is very, very soft, and it allowed me to tie knots into the fine silver. I was also learning how to electroform just as a technical study. I didn't think that the two had any relationship to each other until I had them side by side one day and realized that I was essentially making the same form, but the emotional quality that they evoked was very different. One was really refined and the other was pretty raw. Next image, please. So this is the resulting piece, and the electroformed piece is underneath the printed fabric. So it's visible, but it's obscured a little bit. And the fine silver rests on top of the printed fabric, and it's finished as a brooch and can be worn out in the world. Next image. This piece is meant to show the difference between what a person shows on the outside versus what is hidden on the inside. Next image. So I feel ready to move forward and pass this body of work. This is part of my collection of cat whiskers, and I've used them several times in my work, and I want to continue to work with them. I really love cat whiskers. I think they're really beautiful. They have a beautiful gesture in the way that they taper from thick to thin and the way that the line changes. Some of them taper or go from a black color to a white color, which is really cool. But it also represents for me a moment in time. When I come upon one, I feel like I find it at the right moment to receive this gift from one of my cats. So this is the idea that I'm hoping to pursue in my work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. That was really illuminating in quite a few pieces of yours where I was wondering about the process. For anyone that's got additional questions for Sue, please save them for the end. We promise there will be time for questions. And I'll pass it over to Adrianne.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you, Sue. That was great. I too love cat whiskers, so that was quite fun to see that pile at the end there. And everything Sue said about Grand Valley, everybody's been fantastic to work with. We really appreciate all you've done to get this show into existence over there. So let me start a little bit about my work. I live in the Virgin Islands. You may hear a rooster crow in the background. Some of the other people have heard it when we've been on other Zoom calls. So if you do, that's very normal. And they run around like crazy here. Hopefully my boy Chester will be quiet while I'm chatting today. I have a background in metalsmithing, and after my mom passed away in 2014, I really became very uncreative. My life just sort of changed so dramatically. And I stepped away from really doing any studio work. And after some time had passed, I really felt as though I was ready to sort of face my grief in the form of creating a new body of work. And this sort of came about using some new processes for me. I began using wood as a material quite more so than I ever had, and creating more sculptural pieces versus smaller scale jewelry size pieces. This work here called Her Me is made out of wooden dowel rods, poplar wooden dowel rods, and it has 37 rungs. And it's a ladder form, and I've used the ladder in the past as a metaphor for time that has passed or a distance between myself and somebody who is no longer with me. So I've created the largest rung as the broken rung, signifying the end of my mom and I's time together. But I also still love the idea of jewelry and how it brings a sentiment to the work when you're actually touching it and wearing it. So this piece became a very long necklace that can be worn or just, hung on the wall. But I like the sentimentality. It brings a more intimacy to it for me. And working with wood has been a very satisfying and challenging new endeavor. And this piece is actually finished with a shoe polish, and I warm up and char the wood, and then I soak it in a shoe polish very quickly while it's still warm. And it's just such a lovely, beautiful, soft finish. If you get to see this piece in Grand Valley at the gallery, you can actually see there's a really nice sheen to it. I think that polish just gets all absorbed into the nooks and crannies of the grain, and it's quite satisfying. Next slide, please. So this piece is called Residue, and my mom was definitely a lotion, perfume, makeup hoarder. And my father just hasn't cleaned out anything. So I kind of took on that role. There's still a lot to be cleaned out. I mean, it's been since 2014. There's still a lot of lotion, and there's still a lot of perfume and makeup pieces on her old vanity. And I find myself, when I visit their home, just opening up the lotion and smelling it. And I love seeing the half-used lotion in the containers. I know she touched it. And that makes me so sad, but also so connected to her, because I can put my finger on there and know that hers was also there. And it was her regular routine. She would do this and open this and touch it every single day in the morning. And that was a part of her life for 69 years. So I decided to take some of that makeup and just dip it into a plaster layer and display it out on this large mirror, and just encapsulating those pieces that she touched that were a part of her everyday life. Next slide, please. And there's a detail shot. If you look in there, you can see where I had to sort of use a thin wire to do the dipping. There's some little holes, and I know even a few of the pieces have maybe some lipstick oozing out. And I kind of like that. It shows that that was still a product underneath there. And again, sort of emphasizing what was part of her daily routine and these items that she touched. Next slide, please. This piece, titled Year After Year After Year, is a dart that I created out of brass and sterling silver. And the dart is the size that you would imagine of a dart. And set apart from it, I've done this large sculpture based off of a funeral wreath. And it's a wooden background with 69 blown up balloons on the board, kind of held up by a fabricated wood tripod. And this piece is about the amount of years that my mom was alive. And I just really began thinking about how quickly time goes. And all of a sudden a year went by. All of a sudden 5 years goes by. Amanda, at the beginning of the convo, you said 2019 feels like forever ago. I absolutely agree, but it does go by quickly. And growing up, we always did the amusement parks, and I always loved to play that dart game and pop the balloons. And this all kind of came together for me in this funeral wreath form, and just how quickly the time can go by. So when you tear down the exhibition, Grand Valley, please feel free to use the dart to pop the balloons. It's very satisfying, but don't throw it. Just kind of go up and poke at it. So that's year after year after year. Next slide, please. So I decided to do this group of seal sashes, and there was a point after my mom passed, you know, friends would say, hey, come on out to this opening. Oh, would you like to come and do this? And I just couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't drive in my car by myself. I would just be a mess. I would go into a store and have to leave because I just couldn't stop crying. And I was very embarrassed by the way that I was feeling. And I didn't quite know how to share it with anybody. And I really couldn't stop grieving. So I started creating these sashes that expressed some of the emotions I was feeling at the time that I was just so confused by. So this one, I Can't Stop Grieving. Next slide, please. This one is Lonely and Sad, Lonely Sad. And that's really how I felt all the time. Just tried to go and live my life, but I had this very deep, dark feeling inside. And you can see in the detail shot, what I've done is just drilled a lot of little holes and then stitched the red thread through the little holes. And I love that kind of ragged textural thread dangling down. And I also am a creature of habit with my work. I love just kind of doing a repetitive thing. And this was very satisfying for me to drill all of these little holes. I had this whole kind of process where I had my drill press set up and I would just slide that and work through it. Next slide, please. This is No Self-Esteem, My Mom Died, and Vulnerable. And those were other emotions that I felt. The no self-esteem, that was a tough one for me to put out there as a sash, because I felt as though my mom had been my cheerleader my whole life. And when she left, when she passed, that cheerleader was no longer there for me. And I felt myself kind of plummet into this no self-esteem vibe. And, you know, to kind of figure out my way out of that without her as my cheerleader, without her being able to call me or me to call her, that was definitely a difficult feeling. But I think, again, it was important for me to recognize these feelings and to put it out there on my work. I know that this isn't an abnormal thing for people to go through now. I've done a lot of internet research on this. Next slide, please. So this piece is called The In-Between, and it is a life-size hospital curtain that I fabricated by sewing. I love sewing machines. My mom taught me how to sew when I was young, and she got fed up because I kept breaking her machine. So she finally bought me my own machine, which I still have and use all the time. So I created this large scale hospital curtain, and I did this tulle fabric over top. I wanted this sort of veil to go over top of the one layer. And you can see in the detail shot, there's stitching on there. So what I did is I had my iPhone from the last 9 months of her life. I had gotten the phone in January and she passed in October. And I had every text message between her and I on that phone. So I decided to write them all out in my sketchbook. And then I went back through and I chose some of the moments that just popped out to me. You know, it was just silly little banter. Oh, did you hear J. Crew is having a sale? Oh, you know, I can't wait to go on vacation. And it was that in-between banter. It wasn't about that big trip that we took to Disney World or that vacation we planned for a year to go to Italy. It was those little daily moments. That's what I miss so much. And this piece is about that and just emphasizing the importance of that. I still sometimes pick up the phone thinking, oh, I'm just going to text my mom or call my mom. And then, of course, you go through those feelings again. Oh, I can't do that. But those text messages really created a timeline for our last 9 months together. And it's so important to me. Next slide, please. So this work called Creamed Corn is a bed that I fabricated. And Amanda, actually, let's jump to the next slide. I think it's maybe a detail shot too. You can read on top of the sheet, she was undergoing a stem cell transplant to help her live. And all I could think about was the smell. And if you want to jump back to the previous slide, that would be great. My mom did 2 stem cell transplants, and she was sequestered into a little portion of a hospital down in Pittsburgh. And she, during this time, you have to drop the person's immune system down to like nothing. So anyone that comes in has to be very clean. You can't, have touched things. You don't want to pass any germs off to the person going through the transplant. But whatever preservative they put in her, it smelled like a can of cold cream corn. And I walked into the room and there she was going through hell. And I just was thinking about how bad it smelled in there. And facing that, knowing that I felt that way, there was like a large layer of guilt for me. But also, it was important to face it. And I had to. So this piece is about that hospital bed and approaching it and discovering her trying to live and smelling like cream corn. And I wish I could go back to that time and just see her. I don't care that she smelled like cream corn now. It was fine. All right, forward, please. And you can go forward. Thank you. And there's a process shot of me creating this bed. I had a certain model that I used that I found online, and woodworking, this is kind of all new endeavor for me. So it was challenging, but also really exciting to try something new. So I was grateful to have a big garage at the time that I could really spread out and do this. And it comes apart, which makes it nice for transportation. Got to think about that when you're making larger pieces. Next slide, please. So I had mentioned in the previous piece about how we all needed to not spread germs to her while she was in this process of the stem cell transplant. And going to the hospital, there were just hand sanitizers everywhere. It was like, now we see that everywhere. I think it was pre-pandemic, of course, a hospital. And it was just this constant, did you sanitize your hands? Did you clean your hands? Everybody sanitize. My brother and my dad and I constantly saying that. And I came up with this idea that I wanted to create a grouping of hand sanitizers. I imagined them similar to my makeup piece, just a very simple white sanitizer. And with some help of a friend, he showed me how to do a ceramic mold. And strangely, I kept finding hand sanitizers like on the ground, these style sanitizers. I'm like, okay, something is telling me that I need to make this work. I'll just be walking down the street and I look down and there's a plastic sanitizer laying there. It was so weird. So I did a slip cast porcelain mold and spent, many days just, I think I'll go down and pour another one. And then I think I made 26 of them total. This image shows just a few of them. Next slide, please. And there is a shot in my studio of some of the hand sanitizers that I found. Again, so weird. And there's a shot in progress of me firing them at a ceramic studio. So I did a few rounds of firing and I did the initial first firing and then the glaze firing. So that was also a new experience for me and really exciting to just try a new material as well. Next slide, please. Oh, and that's it. All right, thank you all.
Thank you, Adrian. And I also want to mention, I feel so lucky that we get to do this Zoom presentation with you, because the last three pieces were at the Erie Museum where the exhibition was before it came to us at Grand Valley, but we didn't have space for them here. And so everybody here on this call, you sort of get the special full spectrum of Adrian's work.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda.
All right. And then I'll pass it over to Renee.
All right, I'm just setting a timer. Okay, 15 minutes on. All right, I'm talking a little bit more about the work that I made before the show, just to illustrate a story that is very important to me and how this work has manifested. So for me, I am just, my brother died in 2002. I was 6 months pregnant, and I was very, I didn't start making work about it right away. I had always made work about ephemeral things and the temporary nature of things, bubble blowers, and I was really fascinated with that kind of thing. And so it took me a little bit to process. I was making quilts for my family, because what do you do with their clothing, right? Like, you don't want to get rid of it. It's really hard. So I was making these quilts for everyone and cutting his clothing apart. And I had this epiphany that this was really powerful, that the clothing was akin to skin, right? Like, and it kind of smelled like him. And so I really am fascinated with kind of the commemoration that can be held within objects in our daily lives and how it brings us closer to people that have passed. So this is my brother's clothing. And the piece to the left is one of the last pieces that I made. It took me 3 years to figure that out. Drove me crazy. Next slide. I was also fascinated by the casting process, which is a love of mine. But things go wrong when you cast. They don't always go right. There's uncertainty in the process. And so what I was doing was kind of leaning into that uncertainty and casting his clothing, like dipping it in wax. This is one of his work shirts, and it's hinged and it opens up. And then kind of taking a torch to reveal all of the fabric. Like, you can even see the tag on the back. And so I was so afraid that I would lose it, like I lost him, but I didn't. So that's good. And I did a couple of these, and I had, a whole series of this idea of impermanence. But I'm really fascinated also by the weight. So when we're sad, there's always that kind of weight that accompanies it. I've done a series of hand fans as well that are out of metal. It's just this like heaviness that you can't get over, and it just permeates like everything that you do. And yeah, it's like on your shoulder all the time. Can you do the next slide, Amanda? This piece was more of his clothing that I kind of dyed these shades of black and lavender and gray. This is the actual map of where he was killed. So I became obsessed with space as well. Like, this house is where I did most of my mourning over the loss of my brother. And Punxsutawney, where I'm from, and that area is so shocking to me. Like, every time I go home and I look at the hills and I think about where this all had manifested and happened. So he was out hunting turkey, by the way, and this guy thought he was a turkey and shot him. But I was really fascinated too with the coverings over caskets, and wanted to create one. And I wanted this to be roughly his size, but stupidly in the quilting process, it had shrunk down and became smaller, but oh well. And so it's kind of trimmed by velvet. And I had never been up to where he was killed until recently. And so I asked my dad to put his little childhood cowboy star in that location, and that is gold leafed. And I use gold a lot in my work, even the work in the gallery. The leaf, it for me signifies the soul or the essence of something, and it's this moment of importance. But this is all kind of beaded, and I really also have a lot of fun making this stuff and like learning new things and leaning into the process. Okay, next one. I also did a whole series of veils. So I heard Adrian mentioned the veil. And for me, I am also fascinated by the Victorian mourning process. And veils allowed women to be in a public space and a private space at the same time. And I find that that idea really interesting to me. How often can we be in two places at once like that? This is one of the last veils. They also look a lot like masks. Some look more like veils. Like I've had one with veils of tears, and but this one is me, and it's two of my faces, and I'm leaning forward in the picture, but you can see kind of the tears or the mass of this like thread coming out of my eyes. I feel like I have cried so much over this loss that, you know, and I've had other losses too. I mean, my dad died when I was 4 going on 5. So my life really has been forged in this. But it just never gets easier, and you just get used to carrying it, right? It doesn't get easier. You become accustomed to the carrying of the grief. My dad told me that one time, and I believe it. But I'm really kind of fascinated by that idea. Okay, next slide. This was the absolute last piece I did, and I am telling you, I obsessed over the thread, the most smallest scrap of fabric. This is my grandpa and my grandma's, my cousin, another set of grandparents, my dad. My mom had his bathrobe left, and I did a lot of work with these things, but I wanted to purge myself of it. And I honestly felt that I had this really distinct feeling that I was haunting my brother, and that like, I was like, he's thinking, Renee, you need to move on. And I could have made work forever about this topic, and it became very easy. It felt like it had some measure of success. And I realized that I was no longer challenging myself. And so I was invited to be a part of this show curated by Gail Brown that was about aprons. And so I made this apron, and it has like his buttons that kind of attach all of the clothing underneath. And it was, it weighed about 10 pounds. It weighed the size of a baby. And I was pregnant at the time, and I looked pregnant, and I couldn't get up the hill. And so I asked my dad in 2019 to take me up, and my sister and I went up, and I could not believe he found the exact location and was able to dig up the cross that they had buried there. And I was able to get this picture, and it was just a really emotional moment for all of us. And it was really cathartic to just move on and stop. And so it all kind of came full circle. Also for me, aprons are a form of protection. And they also have this sentimentality attached to it. And so I like that it's kind of protecting me as well as this clothing. Yeah, it does weigh kind of a ton. And my sister, I meant to walk up the hill with this on, but my sister said, could I help you carry it? And it's just like grief where people assist you in that. But my dad wouldn't let me wear it because it was bear season. So I had to put it in a bag, and we had our orange on. So, but I still carried it, but not like I wanted to carry it. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So this led me to a whole new body of work that you'll see in the gallery, which is my Victorians would wear black when they were in grief for up to 3 years, depending on who died. And then they would fade into shades of gray and lavender. And so for me, this work is shades of gray. It's me moving out of talking about it, but somewhat still holding on to it. It's about empathy. It's about relationships lived and formed, and starting to stop obsessing about these people that have passed and start thinking about the people that are currently in my life. And I should take advantage of them being there. And I think that it's a rich topic to make work about, and it can at times feel, I don't know, like kitschy, because every intro to sculpture student, when they go into a sculpture class and they cast bronze, wants to cast their hand. And it's just, for me, it was really hard. I was like, oh my God, is my work going to feel one-dimensional? But I did a lot of research, which I love doing. And I yell at my students, I can't believe no one picks up a book anymore, and they immediately run to the internet or Pinterest. And I do too, but I also find value in reading books. But I Googled empathy, and empathy is hand gestures, on a shoulder, holding hands, a hand on top of another hand. And it was so powerful to me. And then I started looking, you can move forward too, Amanda. I started looking at cave paintings, and I mean, these are thousands and thousands of years old. And these people were putting their hand on the wall and spraying paint around it and capturing their hands. And we get to go and we get to see that in images, or some people have the good fortune of seeing it. But I thought, oh my gosh, we're like constantly looking at our hands, right? And not only that, but it's how we make things. We always talk about hand-eye coordination. So I saw a lot of these like kind of multi-layered references to the hands. And I decided to like bite the bullet, and I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. Hopefully it doesn't look kitschy. The one before was my son and I holding hands. And this one is my husband and I pinky swearing. And so a lot of the work is about like interpersonal dynamics. And, you know, John and I made this promise to each other, and we're holding to it and we're working through it. And the other one with well, could you move forward a little bit, Amanda? This is Tommy and I bound together, my son, for good or bad. You know, him and I are in it together. And I was also shocked. I think he was 16 or 17 at the time. He's 19 now, but his hand was really big. His head's also really big, I think. But kind of obsessed about the size of his noggin. But I loved also how this looked like we were in prayer. And then in other images, it also looks like a uterus. And so it kind of like goes back into all of those layers. I am going back to my roots, and I'm casting paper pulp. And that was my first degree. My BFA was in fibers and paper making. And it picks up like every characteristics, but it also is imperfect. So it adds this like richness where it's not like a perfect bronze hand. It feels warmer and lighter. Well, of course it's lighter. Okay, I don't know how many more images I have. This one was one of the first ones that I created in this series, and it is my hand. And I just think that empathy starts with oneself and being kind to oneself, and kind of digging in and figuring out who you are and having a relationship with yourself. You know, I am so happy and content with my own company, even though I like people. But again, you can see how the gold is being used as that kind of element of the soul or something of significance and important. It's also hidden from the wearer or the viewer. And so it's kind of the secret for the wearer. And I'm not sure, do we have another image? Okay, I do want to mention, which I didn't put in here. I've been posting them on Instagram and Facebook, but I've also started to move into magenta, which is the most fantastic color. And so with this body of work, I'm talking about friendship and kind of moving out of family, and I'm moving into brighter colors instead of these subdued things. And so I've been making anyone that I have intellectually collaborated with, like Jim Beauvais, Jen Townsend, Bev Seeley, my mentor. And, you know, these are all people that are my family that I've chose. So that's kind of the new work, but I didn't put it in here. I apologize. So yeah, that's it. I think I made it. Okay, I have 1:52. All right. So
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Renee. That was great. I also can share that Renee on Instagram is Zettle_Sterling, if anyone wants to follow her. I've been loving the color of those new pieces. It's so intense. All right, so I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and we'll open it up to questions. Katie, I don't know if anything has come through in the chat, but feel free to read it out. And then if anyone is interested in using the raise hand function or just taking yourself off mute, feel free to do that. Art gallery staff, if you happen to have any questions, feel free to jump in too.
I have a question. Sue didn't talk about her woodworking and that process and how you learned it. I've always been fascinated by that.
Well, I consider myself a metalsmith who sometimes works in wood. So I approach it as a metalsmith, which when I talk to people who are woodworkers, it drives them crazy because it's way slower than it probably should be. So I don't know what to say about it. I just use the tools that I know how to use. Karen Ernst teaches wood furniture at Edinburgh, and I'm always knocking on her door for help. And she very graciously helps me out every time I ask her for some help. But I really haven't really learned how to do it so much. I just kind of figure stuff out.
Oh, it's so well done and pillowy and perfect. I also, I don't know if there's any questions, but a little bit about how the exhibition came together might be important for people listening. So Sue and Adrian and I wanted to curate an exhibition of other artists' work that deal with the topic of mourning. And I do remember that being our first conversation. And after putting the book together, I was like, hell no, I do not want to deal with more artists. I just got done curating an exhibition based on the book in Pennsylvania on the other side of the state. And I was like, I can't do it. But I'd be down if we did it together. And so that's kind of how that started. And Sue, of course, was my professor, and Adrian and I went to school together. I was grad and she was undergrad. So we have known each other for a long time. So I'm really honored to be showing with them. And I also failed to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak, and thank Grand Valley for hosting it. But that's kind of how it took off. And I've just had a great time. It's been a really rewarding experience.
Agreed.
We're
Jill.
grateful. Go ahead. Oh, hang on. I think we have someone who raised a hand.
Well, first off, thanks to the three of you for joining us today, and it's been great. Thank you for being vulnerable with your sharing through your work and also through today. It seems like there's a very, there could be a very performative aspect to some of the pieces, and I'm just curious, did any of you do that? So I think of Adrian, for example, those sashes, were those things that you physically wore at any point? Renee, there's some of the images of the pieces for you too. Was that ever a part of the work that you didn't share or you did share?
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself, so I was kind of messing around with that, Jill, but can you guys hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to jump in about my sashes. After I made those, I definitely put them all on just to feel their weight and their presence on me. But it's, they're made of steel, so they're definitely heavy. And that goes back to something Renee was saying about feeling the weight on her apron piece. So it is kind of fun to put that stuff on, and it's although to me that's more of a sculptural piece, it comes back to my roots in jewelry and metalsmithing and wearable, and that was kind of the core of my history as a maker. So yes, I've definitely put those items on.
There we go. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying that you were controlling it and I couldn't unmute. Yeah, I get that question a lot because a lot of my work is really performative, not just this particular body of work or the objects of mourning. But I'm not, I'm kind of shy. I prefer to just, I like that there's a performative nature, and I like wearing it and getting the photographs. I have done some video work, but I'm not skilled at it, so I don't really show it. But I think it's mostly I don't want to put myself out there that far. I'm really impressed by people that are capable of doing that. And it's not part of my temperament. So I would just be so freaked out. Right now I'm freaked out that people are looking at me. And I look really red. I look like a tomato. I think it's all the red bouncing off this room. So, yeah, I get really self-conscious. I'm like, no.
You look great. Don't worry about
I
it.
think
Like a red.
Ellie had a question, so I don't know if they can unmute themselves. There we go. Oh, can you unmute Ellie Lovers, Amanda?
Yes, just a second. Okay, Ellie should get a box.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to say I loved the show. I loved all the work in the show. I especially loved the scissors pieces. They were so cool. And I liked the big ladder piece. I was trying to figure out what it was made out of. And I like to know now that it was dowels dipped in shoe polish. So cool. Renee, I had a question for you. I wanted to know more about this piece. It's like the hand on the shoulder with like the like what inspired the form and like, yeah. I think Renee needs to be unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know why that keeps happening. Yeah, that's a very similar piece to, and it's really good to see you. I miss you so much. She was one of my students. Lived in Korea for a long time. I missed her. It's very similar to the other one on the chest, only, you know, I've also I did hospice care for 2 years, and I had 2 patients in that time, thinking like, oh, I'm going to see everything about death. I want the nitty gritty of death. And then I found out that, one, there was a lot of, like, I would always touch her on her shoulder, or when you do the Google search, there's a lot of like empathetic hand gestures of like putting your hand on somebody's shoulder. And so I was kind of using that and my experience with 2 of my hospice patients, and wheeling them around and gently like just letting her know I was there. And that was a really rewarding experience. And so that kind of gesture comes from that, but that hand is my hand. So I'm kind of patting myself on the back. Not really. Yeah. Does that answer it, Ellie?
I was also wondering about, like, it's not like just the hand on the heart, the other one, it's also, there's a lot coming off of it, like the forms that like grow off of the hand. And I kind of wondered what inspired that.
Yeah, well, the one with the pot, just this, it was like I kept the ornamentation on the inside as a gift, again, like the gold for the wearer and not really the viewer. And the piece, I wanted then the flourish, the ornamentation to start coming out of that space and becoming known. And so that was the thinking behind, you know, how it started to like change and become more dramatic and floral. So yeah, glad you like that piece.
Oh yeah, I'm obsessed. Thank you.
We had another question in the chat.
Yes, that was Susanna. They said, I think that this was briefly touched on while each of you were talking, but how do you begin the creation process after you experience a loss?
I can start first since I'm unmuted still. Well, like I said, I waited, I think it was 6 years or something that I was kind of waiting. I didn't feel that I was ready to process it enough to make artwork about it. And I had a child, you know, that same year I gave birth to Tommy, who's named after my brother. And so I had my hands full in that respect. So it took me a while to, sometimes things do. Like I still want to make work about herbs and imbuing them, like, and embedding them in pulp and like the medicinal quality of these plants, but I'm not ready to make that yet. I will someday. I just have to sit on it more and just kind of like tinker it around in my brain. And that was kind of the approach I have to pretty much everything. But it is you know what I find really interesting is that it's one of my favorite parts of this show is to look at where we are at in the stages of grief. So in the show, I am moving out of that stage. This is my like gray into lavender. This is I got to stop haunting my brother and obsessing over this. And to me, Adrian's work is really raw and primal. And, you know, and I think hers is the most recent loss. And so there's, you know, and Suze has this like poetic, contemplative things that surround it. So I found that really interesting too, that we're kind of capturing the stages of grief. And if you look at Objects of Mourning on my website, you can see when I was closer to the topic, the work was a little bit more raw and emotionally like charged. And now I feel like it's more subtle, and that's just me. That's my thought on it.
I too had to sort of sit on things for a while. And my son was 2.5 when my mom died. So I was a stay-at-home mom at the time, just really in the thick of raising a child. So it was difficult to really face taking those emotions and using them in artwork. And part of me doesn't, this sounds really weird or selfish. I think Renee and Sue, you probably have felt this way to some extent at some point. It's like, I don't want to stop making the work because then it might feel like I'm not sad anymore.
Yeah.
I would say for me, I guess I come from a little bit different perspective, and I guess I entered it kind of by accident and making some work, and then afterwards realizing what it was about. And then after that, then I started to more consciously make work that was about specific time periods or people.
We have a question from Eddie, and then we have a question from Madison.
I probably have to ask them to unmute, don't I? Just a moment.
I'm afraid to mute myself.
Okay, here we go.
Oh,
Good
really?
afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Eddie.
Afternoon.
First of all, I'd like to thank Sue and Adrian and Renee for sharing on a very sensitive topic. You all did wonderful. And I added my video, my face, just to add a little diversity to the Zoom. And seriously, on a serious note, Renee, your pieces have to be salt stained by your tears. I seriously feel you, and I felt every word. And I just wanted to really commend you. This is not about me, but I recently lost my father, and dealing with the grief was something I've never dealt with. And it took me 4 months to shed a tear. And to see you actually be able to do what you're doing is amazing. It's almost supernatural.
Oh, thank you.
You know, and I commend you. But my question is, how much has it really helped you in your grieving process?
A lot, actually. And I think art is therapy, whether you want to admit it or not, or some people might argue that it's not. And I think it is. And also the act of making is an empathetic act. But for me, it was, wait, could you ask that question again? I want to make sure I get it right.
Yes, just how much has it helped in your grieving process? How much?
Yeah, a lot. It's for when Tommy died, I wanted to wear a t-shirt that said, "He lived. My brother was here. He was important." And it helped me tell this to other people in the world. And it also, I felt like I had to do the best that I could to live for him and me. And so I took it on as a personal goal to live my life to the fullest and make this work and talk about him, because it brought him to life. And it made me continue to have a relationship with him. And like I said, I've always been used to having relationships with people that aren't here. For example, my dad, my mom had lost a child, my sister Leanne. And so everything's always been like tainted by this, and it's always been a part of my life. And it just allowed me to continue to have this relationship that was both really quiet and also very outward, because I wanted people to I don't know, maybe heal from what I'm saying. I'm hoping people can heal from seeing our work and start having an active conversation about it. I don't know if that answered your question, but that is kind of how I felt about the work. It was a huge part in me healing. And each of my siblings, there's 5 of us total, and Tommy had died. We all have approached this topic, well, and this grief in a different way. My one brother kind of joined a gang, biker club, struggled emotionally with it. And he was really close to Tommy's age. And my sister, you know, she'll plant a garden, she'll put something out there to commemorate him. And so we've all kind of approached it in very different ways. And losing a brother is also really hard because it's like Sue said, it's like a peer. And not a lot is talked about with peer loss. Like a lot is talked about with losing a child, losing your parent, but that straight across peer loss is, I think, not talked about enough. And it's, in my opinion, kind of neglected in terms of like how you feel, because it was all about how did my parents feel? Are they okay? Right. And it was less about like how our siblings felt. Anyway, I'm babbling. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Amanda, if you want to unmute Madison.
Yeah. Madison doesn't have their hand raised, so hang on, I have to scroll down. Madison Eggleston.
Oh, there we go.
Hi, I love this show and this was such an amazing talk. The subject matter is so heavy and so well thought out, and you all spoke super eloquently about it. And I was just wondering how you sort of like navigate talking to people about such like personal, like sad things.
For me, I think it gets a little easier if you do it a few times and then spending all the time with my work and creating it. And there were a lot of tears shed alone. But then once it's out there, it's like, okay, I know what this is about. And it's public now. I might as well just talk about it. So I kind of just have to go with it, if that makes sense, Madison. It's hard though. It gets a little bit easier though.
Madison, I've never talked about this work publicly before, so I had to think about it a lot. But then at some point I just realized, you know, everybody has loss in their life and everybody has felt this, and why not just say it and be open about it?
I've been talking about this topic for probably 15 years, maybe more now. And I think I love talking about this topic probably more than making the work. I love talking about this. I know it seems weird, but it gives me great joy to share my experiences and to hopefully like just connect with people. When I've lectured at different places, people will come up and like, we'll have like really interesting conversations and they'll tell me about their loved ones and who they were and what they meant to them. And so I really like talking about this. It's weird, but yeah, my favorite. It's a healing thing.
We have another hand with Cappy.
Hi. Hey, everybody.
Hi, Kathy.
I'm wondering if you will talk about, I know that you've all supported each other through the losses that you've experienced. And I just wondered if you would touch on what it was like for you to see the show up for the first time together and see all of the work that you've been doing separately over the years and the conversations that you've had sort of merge into this thing that brought your feelings and your work together in one place.
Well, I was kind of surprised by how well the work all looked together, because I think that we all make work that's pretty different from each other, but it is all rooted in traditional metalworking. So I guess maybe that's what the link is. Yeah, and we definitely have talked a lot in the past couple of years while planning this show. So it was just a rewarding feeling.
Yeah, When
I
we
absolutely agree.
oh, that's Adrian. Yeah.
I just said I agree.
Adrian, you're like, you sound like you're in Star Wars again. So, my favorite part was when we first got to see the show, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't know this person was Adrian's dad, and he stepped all over her ladder. And I just remember being like, I'm just gonna stand over here and look at this thing. The look on her face, I was like, oh my God, I'm like, it was kind of like, funny as we random.
Yes, that was, my dad wears a size 15 shoe. So I was like, but it was fine.
It was really inspiring to see it together. And we had worked with the museum to just pick the color combinations. That was really important, that it was kind of that lavenders and grays, because we didn't want to overwhelm the work. And it was just, I loved seeing Adrian's ladder as we went in. It really like kind of opened it up. And just formally, I thought everything was well placed, and it's the same in the GVSU gallery. And I had the same response. I was just so shocked by it. Went together really well. And I was afraid that it wouldn't, because our work is so different from one another. There are those, like Sue said, those things, those threads, and I think sometimes it also goes back to like, Sue was our professor, so there's this, like, she taught us these things, so it's like, for me, it like, I'm so glad that this has happened with these two, that we can kind of continue learning from one another.
Looks like we've got Ellie with her hand raised again. Can you unmute yourself, or you need me to?
There you go.
So I just wanted to make a comment. I really appreciated when I had finished going through the show, I noticed the little glass jars and the seed paper, where there was a moment where you could stop and write down some thought you had about grief, whether it was like a specific person or like a feeling of grief. And I thought that was a really thoughtful nod. And I was kind of wondering how you guys came up with adding that to the show.
I can't remember.
Amanda, do you want to take this one?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Ellie, for mentioning that. So that is an activity that's open to anyone that is interested in visiting the gallery. It came about through a handful of conversations between the art gallery staff and a staff member over at the University Counseling Center. Months ago, before the exhibition was installed, we were just doing some basic research about what resources exist on campus. What is grief? What does it look like? How is it different from one person to the next? Are stages of grief a thing? Is it more this just sort of rolling hills experience that you move through and are always living with in different ways? So Les White, who also manages the grief counseling resources at the Counseling Center, asked if we'd have anything that would let people share or like decompress and unwind. And so this is the result of that conversation. And then also, I think it was probably Katie or one of our other gallery members that suggested seeded paper. So the paper is seeded with wildflower seeds. And our vision is that at the end of the exhibition in the spring, we'll plant that somewhere on campus. And so the idea of grief and death will kind of come full circle, and you'll see these flowers grow.
Thank you, Amanda. We have Vicky with another question.
Hi. I want to say, first of all, thank you all for this talk. All of you are so amazing and really, really inspiring. My question is for Adrian. I wanted to ask you about your use of text, and specifically the decision to make your work, the conceptual part of it, very direct and not leave a lot of like question as far as like what the viewer is supposed to get from it. And I didn't know if that was something that you wanted from the very beginning, to have that direct correlation to like what the viewer thinks is happening with the work and what you want to like keep personal. If you could just talk a little bit about that process.
Sure. I feel like there was a point years ago when I was just getting started out in metalsmithing, and I was using text in work. And I just really, I like using text. I know that it's brings this obvious thing right to the viewer's face. And then I sort of fell off of it for a while, and it crept back in this grouping of work. And it crept back in maybe a few years before this work. And for me, it just felt right to express those emotions and those thoughts as words. And it makes me, I like having that, for example, in the in-between piece with the hospital curtain, that really is like a journal for me between my mom and I. And I would love to add even more of our text messages on there. There's space for more. I envision even putting more on top of it and just keeping on layering with that. And there's also this satisfying repetitiveness of sewing that I love to do. And I had mentioned when I was drilling the holes in the sash pieces, I just like that repetition. So sitting there and sewing, it just feels very satisfying for me. So I think just expressing some of these emotions as actual words, it just felt natural for me to go that route. And maybe it's not that mysterious, but maybe I needed to be less mysterious because I had a lot bottled up, and I just wanted to say, all right, here it is. She smelled like cream corn.
Thank you.
Well, also
Sure.
one thing about Adrian is that Adrian's a very direct person, and it's one of my favorite things about her. And so that also comes out in the work. You don't beat around the bush. You say it like it is. And yeah, you're always nice, but you're just very direct. Yeah.
I'd love to add that we had a couple groups of students in the gallery earlier this week. And a few of those students came over to specifically share with me that they loved those sashes because of their directness. And these weren't students who were majoring in art. So, and I don't actually know what their majors were. I just know that they weren't art majors. But I think there's something about that directness that really reaches out to people who aren't studying the art history references or familiar with the standard sort of metaphor process that a lot of artwork can function in. And yeah, that and then they were really interested to know if you had worn them, because they were picturing you like wearing them and walking into a public space and just like being there with this message just held out there on your chest. So had to share that.
I thought that was a really good question too, by the way.
All right. Do we have anything else? I'm really appreciating everyone's questions and thoughts. There were quite a few compliments in the chat, Adrian and Renee and Sue. I won't read through all of them. I'll send them to you later, but lots of appreciation for your presentations and for the exhibition as a whole. All right. Katie shared a link to a survey in the chat. I would greatly appreciate if everyone here could just spend 3 minutes to share your thoughts. It really helps us to build better, more significant and impactful programs moving forward. I also want to mention that we have another 2 series of events that support this exhibition coming up. The next one is on February 17th. That's a Thursday, same time at noon. And that one features 2 GVSU faculty members who teach classes in death and dying. And we'll dig into the sociological and anthropological side of how we as a culture and historically have honored and dealt with death and grief. And of course, I have to just express such a grateful and warm thank you to Sue and Renee and Adrian for being here with us, staying over the 1 hour time mark and sharing your thoughts with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, really wonderful.
All right, we'll share this recording with anyone that wants to go back and see it again. So thanks everybody and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.
And I'll stop the recording.